parashah this week, of course, is Torah, which means offering. Our Torah portion comes out of the book of Exodus, chapter 25, verse 1 to chapter 27, verse 19. Haftarah portion, the prophet portion, comes out of the book of 1 Kings, chapter 5, verse 26 to chapter 6, verse 13. And our Brit Chadasha portion comes out of 2 Corinthians 9, 1 through 15. And in our Torah portion this week, we find that, it begins with the command to have an offering to God. And then the rest of it is concerned about the details of making the tabernacle and the furnishings of the tabernacle. Or in other words, the building of the house of God as well as what is its furnishings. And it's interesting, though, that God is really testing Israel right now. He's testing them to see what is the heart condition of them by the way they will make their offering unto the Lord. It's commanded that Moses take a free will offering from us. In other words, there's not a limit to it. Remember when we saw the census that he took only a half a shekel per person, and that was all he would take, no more, no less. And this offering is of whatever the person's heart is laid upon to give unto the building of the tabernacle. And it's not limited to money. It includes materials, because it gives a list of materials needed to build the tabernacle. The different yarns for the fabrics, the wood for the planks, the copper for the instruments and utensils. So it's not limited just to money. It's expanded into whatever the person's heart feels that they are willing to give unto God. And even from the first of this offering, Adonai is only seeking what the person's heart desires to relinquish and give unto him. This is the test of Israel's desire to be his people. It is a measure of their heart towards God and to becoming the nation of Israel. We find in Exodus 25, 1 through 2, it states that Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, "Tell Bnei Israel to take up an offering for me, from anyone whose heart compels him, that you are to take my offering." You notice it's the word offering. Offering in itself, the word alone means it's something you willingly give. It's not something that you have to give. If it was, it would be the commanded offering or the commanded sacrifice, because it's meant to be given regardless of circumstance. But God says he asked for an offering, a free will offering. And we know this because he asked that it be heart-driven in its composition. In Exodus 25, 8 through 9, "Have them make a sanctuary for me, so that I may dwell among them. You are to make it all precisely according to everything I show you, the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of the furnishings within, just so you make it." This is also part of the test. It's exacting. God gives them the blueprints to the tabernacle. Why? Why do they need a tabernacle for the first place? Because it is the place where God will rest his presence while he is among his people. It is the safe space where they can have that tangible evidence of their God with them no matter where they go, where they can draw strength from his presence and yet be not so close to God in their own unrighteousness and sinless state that they will not come to harm. It is that buffer between the very presence of God and our ability to come to God. And so it's a test. It's a test. It's a test to see how willing are they to desire my presence to be with them all the time. If they are truly desirous to have my presence with them, then they will make this offering of the necessary items to construct the tabernacle so I can rest among them. And you notice it speaks in terms of a home, which of course in biblical times during this time period were tents anyway. because it speaks of making the linen and the fabric to make the walls and so forth. But it also speaks of making the table, the menorah or the candlestick to shine the light. And these are things you would have in a home to furnish them. So this is God's home while he is amongst his people. Becomes the house of God. How bad do you want me to dwell among you is the objective here. And are they willing to follow God's explicit instructions in the construction of this? This is also part of the test. How obedient will you be towards me? Because you remember now, when Moses went up on Sinai to collect the Ten Commandments, while he was up there getting the Ten Commandments, the people didn't know what to do with themselves. Even though they were commanded just to be patient and wait, they got nervous. They tried to speed God along in the creation of the golden calf. It really wasn't that they were trying not to worship God, but they were so worried that they wouldn't have what God was going to send, because Moses said he showed back up, they needed something to tangibly give them a focus to worship God. And so they go to build the golden calf. They get Aaron to make it for them. And so God is saying, I am going to give you the list of materials. I'm telling you everything I need in order to build a tabernacle for me so that I can dwell among you. Will you be obedient enough to give what I ask and nothing else? Don't give me what I don't ask for. And we can truly see Adonai for all his glorious presence is when the tabernacle is among them. And so how can they not work zealously towards preserving that presence with them? Their greatest comfort comes from knowing that God is in the midst of them, always near to them while they're traveling. In fact, Moses, remember, declares to God that he doesn't want to move unless he knows that God himself will lead them. God offers to send his angel to take them into the promised land. Notice there's no way, Jose. Unless your presence abides with us, I would rather stay right here in the desert. How zealous are you for the presence of God? And this is a question also. We're looking at faithfulness. We're looking at obedience. We're looking at zeal towards God. Are all those elements active in a believer's life? And in the Israelites' lives at the time, we see that it's very active in them. Why? Because we read later on in the Torah where they were so zealous to be obedient to God and his instruction to construct a tabernacle, they keep giving things to Moses to build it with until he says, look, I've got more than enough. But how is that zeal today? Where do we find that kind of zeal today? Where do we find it where we desire the presence of God so much in the midst that we're willing to continue to offer unto God whatever he asks us to offer in order to contain that presence with us? Where is that today? Where is it within the body of the Messiah? And where is it in the body of God's people? They say they desire God's presence. They say that they want to see his Messiah return and so forth. But what are they doing to bring it in? What are they doing that he has commanded them to do? And he's only commanded 3 things for them to do. Obedience, faith, and trust. And still they try to bring it all on themselves. When we look into the Haftarah portion, we see the same zeal evident during the building of the first temple, Solomon's temple. There is such a joy in knowing that a temple will be erected. No longer will a temporary structure be there representing God's presence like the tabernacle of David, but there will be a temple, a permanent spot where God can indwell his presence eternally with his people. And we see the zeal in it because Hiram speaks boldly about his joy in knowing that Solomon is ready to build the temple. He says in 1 Kings 5:22-21, when Hiram heard Solomon's words, he rejoiced greatly and said, Blessed be Adonai today, who has given to David a wise son over this great people. So Hiram sent word to Solomon, saying, I have heard the message that you sent me, and I will do all that you desire concerning the cedar and the cypress timber. Hiram lives in Lebanon, where the best cedar trees in the world grow. The best cypress trees in the world grow. And only the finest can be used in the destruction of the house of the Lord. And Hiram says, just let me know. I will ensure that you get the best of my forest to build the temple of God. Hiram is overjoyed at the prospect of the house of Adonai being built. Why? Because he knows that when the temple is complete, that tangible presence of Adonai will dwell with the people, just as God's tangible presence was evident with the people when he dwelt within the tabernacle. And just as they were specifics in building that tabernacle, they are specifics into building the temple of God. And this is the obedience that God expects out of his people when he commands them to do the work of his labor. We find again in 1 Kings 6:11-13. And then the word of Adonai came to Solomon, saying, As for this house which you are building, if you walk in my statutes and execute my ordinances and keep all my mitzvahs by walking in them, then I will establish my word with you, which I spoke to your father David. I will dwell among the children of Israel, and I will not forsake my people Israel. You got to understand, God is saying, look, you're going to build the house, and I know you're going to build it according to what I've told you, and what your father David has given you instructions to build, because I gave him the blueprints, and he gave you everything you needed to build it. But if you don't follow what I've commanded as the leader of this people, I will not rest my presence with this people. But if you continue to walk like your father walked before me, if you continue to obey me and continue to live as I have commanded you to live, as you are the leader over the people, then I will fulfill that which I promised to David. There will never be one from the line of David that does not sit upon the throne of Israel. And not only that, but my presence will never depart from the people. My presence will always be with the people. Trust, obedience, faithfulness. Can Solomon do that? It's the test of the king's heart, as it is the king who represents the people before Adonai. Adonai knew David's heart. He even speaks about his heart being towards him. David is a man after my own heart. And we all know the story of David. You know how many times David failed. We know how many times David sinned before God. But God still said David was a man after his own heart. It was his heart's intent to rise above his humanity, his sinfulness, to have communion and fellowship with his God, that he sought to fulfill his days in obedience. And yes, did he do it all the time? No. But if you look at his life in the overall picture, he epitomizes one striving to have that communion with God, that presence with him. And he exhorts this to his son Solomon. And Solomon now is building the temple. That was the highlight of David's dream, to build a house for his God. And of course, David wasn't allowed to do it, but David knew that Solomon would. And so David gave the zeal to Solomon. And Solomon has taken this zeal and has taken the promises made to his father and the promise to God, and he is fulfilling it. And he is showing his faithfulness, his zeal, and his willingness to trust in God. It just proves when we're obedient to God and at all he commands us, and we give unto God as he has asked us to give, He will return to us the most valuable gift that he can give to anyone, and that is his presence. How many times will we walk in our walk with the Lord when we feel like God has left us? And if we examine what we're doing at that time, how many of those times have we taken our eyes off of him and put them on other things? So we took our trust off of him. And if we've taken our trust off of him, we've taken our faith off of him. We've taken our faith off of him. How can we be obedient to him? See, when all of these things line up, then our lives become an offering unto God, because we desire that presence with him. And he uses us to make his presence known. How did he make his presence known among the Israelites and all who would encounter them? The tabernacle from the beginning. Why? Because the column of cloud and the pillar of fire rested over that tabernacle 24 hours a day. Anyone who come close to that camp saw that the presence of the Almighty God was centered in his people. How did they know that? When Israel was a nation, when they had conquered the land and had set themselves up fortified cities, because that same kind of presence rested on the temple of God, where it could be seen from miles away. You could not mistake who God's people were. And that's the difference that we see in the body today. We have the greater tabernacle. We have the greater temple. Why? Because we have a tabernacle and a temple that's not made with human hands. It has been constructed through God himself, through the body of the Messiah. And yet, where is the glory that resided on the tabernacle? Where is the glory that resided on the temple? Because there is nothing that shows in this world in any way, shape, or form, and the disunified, discombobbled mess that is the body today. We're so busy trying to please ourselves and please other people that we have taken our focus off the one that we are only one we're to please, and it's God himself. Period. Yeah, we do, and we give, and we do these things that we make ourselves feel good, but are those really the things that God would ask us to offer ourselves to? And this is the point that Paul makes in 2 Corinthians 9, 1 through 18. He's exhorting, and he's also warning the congregation in Corinth of their zeal that they have for God, where they made this promise to gather an offering while he's away that he can come back and pick up and take to the saints that are suffering in Jerusalem to show their solidarity, their unity, and their gratefulness to God for their brotherhood. And yet, he's beginning to hear that they're waning. They're becoming faint in their promise. And so he exhorts them. I'm sending brethren there to encourage you, lest you fail. And then the others around you, the Achaeans, the Macedonians, will laugh at you, call you inept brethren. Because the bottom line is what Paul states in 2 Corinthians 9, 6 through 9. The point is, whoever sows sparingly shall also reap sparingly. Whoever sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Now let's examine that for just a minute. This is not necessarily speaking of money. This is not necessarily speaking of anything in that effect. What it is speaking of, whoever sows a sparing spiritual life, your involvement with God, your offering of yourself to God, whoever sparingly offers to God, guess what? You will reap sparingly from God. You will not have that presence of God with you that you wish that you had, or that you see among those who are giving more bountifully of their self to God in his service than others. It doesn't have to be money. It doesn't even have to be materials. You notice that the original offering back in the Torah portion was of things that the people already possessed, that they could have used for their own use, But still, it was more important to make sure that they were serving God with what they had. Even if it meant their lives. Because there were those from the Israelites that were chosen to actually do the work of the building of the tabernacle. And this, when you look at it in its full effect, each one putting in that which they can offer fully of themselves, whether it be material, whether it be labor, whether it be whatever, builds that temple that God dwells. Why? Because each one's heart is focused on God. And therefore God will be in the midst of them. And each one will have the same presence of God about them with the other hand. And imagine if the unified body of Messiah was to take that concept, to get over the pettiness that they have, the sparingness that they have in giving to God because they're so worried it might interfere with their daily lives, and give bountifully unto God. Imagine the return of God's presence back into the body. I hear people speak all the time. I wish that we could, I'm looking to be an Acts 2 church. I'm looking for this end time revival. Well, you know what? You're never going to find it. Why? Because you're too busy looking for yourself and not just what God has asked you to do. God has just asked you to give yourself to Him wholly in all that you do. It doesn't matter what you're doing. It could be the very same things you normally do, but when it's done in an attitude and a heart condition where it's done into the service of the Lord to bring His presence and His glory in the midst of where you're at, you will never fail. You will continually have that presence there. What made that Acts 2 body so powerful was the fact that if you read in chapter Acts, it says they were all in one place, one accord, one mind, and one purpose. There was no disunity. There was no thoughts of other things. We're here to find out what God wants us to do, and then we're going to do it. Period. And of course, in that spirit of unity towards God, with hearts bowed towards Him, given to Him, He befalls the greatest presence of all time. Signs and wonders follow these people. Not because they're special, not because there's something grandiose about them. It's because they just simply beg God to give them boldness, courage, and strength to give everything for Him. See, He doesn't ask you to just give up your normal life. It's your normal life that He wants to be seen through, to show others that you can live a normal life and live for God, and not just live for yourself and live for perverted things, but live for the righteousness that God has made life out of. Our lives are more than just the material things that we do or the material accomplishments that we do. They set the stage for all the spiritual aspects as well. When we work and labor for those that we work for, even if we are self-employed, if our labor is unto God for His glory, to show the faithfulness of God, then God is glorified. His presence will carry Himself with you. Sometimes it will draw the opposite attention from those you're around, but it's still because of whose presence is upon you. And this is what Paul is saying. God is able to make all grace overflow to you so that by always having enough of everything, in other words, never lacking what you need, not your wants, but your needs, you may overflow in every good work. Think about it. I know folks that got money they can burn, and they're the saddest folks in the world. Some of the most perverted folks in the world. But then I know some folks that they got two nickels to rub together and you would never know it. They're content. They're satisfied. Why? Because they have everything they need. They have put their faith, their trust in God to provide and take care of them, first and foremost. And if He asks them to give anything, they would give it unto Him. And that's the difference. is a difference. This is why God's presence dwelled with the Israelites coming out of Egypt. They were so zealous to have that presence with them and so afraid not to have it with them that they would have done anything to keep that presence there. Solomon so desired that presence that his father spoke of to him, and that he had desired himself so much that he gave everything of his treasuries as well as that his father had, in order to bring that temple there for God to dwell with his presence. And understand that even the Jewish sages say the second temple, when it was rebuilt, never contained the presence of God that it contained in the first temple. It never compared to the first. That is the difference between the true zeal of God's people and their offering to him. And remember, God speaks a lot about it in Ezra and Nehemiah. Trust me that I will not pour out the blessings of heaven upon you. Make sure there's food in my house first. Make sure that my house filled first. And yet, they never got the same presence that the people during the time of Solomon. It's amazing, isn't it? But think about this. The very presence of God returns to the temple in 33 AD. He's there. And there are those who recognize it. They give everything to walk with it. They follow it wherever it goes. Why? Because that presence is the greatest thing that they can have. Even the Apostle Peter, speaking in his humanity, tells Yeshua he can't die and leave them. Oh, surely you can't do that, Lord. He's not saying that to be evil. He's saying it because I don't want you to leave us. We've got you here. Why do you want to go away? And he's not understanding God's plan. But the understanding is his zeal to have that presence among him is overwhelming to him. This is the point in our terumah, our offering unto God. What is our offering unto God? How is our hearts before God? Are they in that place where we're willing to give whatever in order to keep his presence with us? It has nothing to do with money. It has everything to do with your heart. It's God's test. Because even rich people can have a heart towards God. And so can people who are broke. Because they're willing to give him even their very service. I have nothing to offer but my time, Lord. There used to be a sign I saw in a funny place. It was placed up in a bathroom of all places in a synagogue, which was an interesting place to put a sign like this. And it said, anyone can give God their money or their possessions, but it really takes someone who has a heart towards God to give him their time, because they can never get that back. And that's the truth. The offering unto the Lord is your time and your heart. That's the word of exhortation. We're in a time when this is what God really wants, is for his children, his people, to quit worrying about silly things and to give of themselves to show him. This is the importance of having the community around the presence, the unified, wherever believers are gathered together, whose presence is in the midst of them. But if we're not unified and we gather together, is his presence with us? And you can always tell it when you walk in a congregation where everybody's unified and seeking the presence of God, because there is a spirit And there is a presence that is in that place that will overwhelm you. To a point where you would never want to leave. And that is the whole point. Do we really desire His presence enough to offer everything that we have towards Him? Him they can use. Or He can use, sorry. Them that He can use. So that is our word of exhortation from Torah. Your offering.